Most mornings begin the same way. A faint ribbon of sunlight slips through the trees. The air is cool enough that every breath seems to linger for a second before disappearing. Somewhere beyond the fence, a robin lands at the edge of a shallow puddle left behind by last night's rain. A sparrow follows, then another. They flutter into the water without hesitation, sending tiny circles across the surface as drops catch the early light like scattered glass. For a few quiet moments, the world feels completely ordinary. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of another bird hidden somewhere above, the steady rhythm of wings lifting, settling, lifting again. Then, almost without you noticing, everything changes. One by one, they leave. Not in a rush, not frightened. They simply rise into the trees and vanish. You wait, expecting one of them to return. None of them do. The puddle is still there. The morning is unchanged. But the birds are simply gone. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe before you leave, because what you're about to discover may forever change the way you look at the birds that visit your yard. There are moments in nature that seem so familiar we stop asking questions about them. And sometimes, those are the moments hiding the biggest secrets. But that is only the beginning. Because the strange part isn't that birds love to bathe. The strange part is what happens immediately afterward. Almost every bird disappears from sight, as though an unseen doorway has quietly opened above your head. And once you notice that pattern, it's surprisingly difficult to stop wondering where they really go, and what they've been doing all this time while we believe they were simply gone. I suspect you have seen it too, even if you never gave it much thought. You glance outside with your morning coffee, and the birds seem to follow a quiet routine you have watched hundreds of times without ever questioning it. They gather where the water is shallow. They splash with surprising enthusiasm. Tiny feathers shimmer in the light. A blue jay shakes itself so hard that droplets scatter across the grass. A finch hops onto a nearby stone, fluffs its feathers once, then disappears into the branches. By the time you look up again, every one of them is gone. Most of us simply return to our day. There are emails to answer, errands to run, dishes waiting in the sink. The moment slips away so easily that it almost feels unimportant. Yet something about it stays with you. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was unfinished. It leaves behind the quiet feeling that you stopped watching just before the real story began. That feeling is surprisingly familiar. Nature often does this to us. It offers only the first few pages, then closes the book before we realize we were reading it. Perhaps that is why so many ordinary moments feel strangely meaningful long after they have passed. They seem complete on the surface, yet something inside tells you there was another layer hidden just beyond your sight. And the more you begin noticing these small disappearances, the more difficult they become to dismiss as simple coincidence. There is a growing sense that the birds are following a routine so precise, so quietly intentional, that our eyes catch only the beginning of it. But what happens next is where the morning becomes far more remarkable than it first appears. What most people never realize is that the moment a bird leaves the water is not the end of the behavior. It is the beginning of something far more deliberate. If you were somehow able to follow that same bird into the trees without disturbing it, you would notice that it does not wander aimlessly. It flies to a place it seems to know by memory. Sometimes it is a sunlit branch just 20 feet away. Sometimes it disappears deep inside an evergreen where the light barely reaches. There, hidden behind layers of leaves, the pace of the morning changes completely. The bird becomes still. It turns slowly. It lifts one wing, then the other. Tiny movements, almost too small to notice, continue for several minutes. A single feather is drawn carefully through its beak. Another is gently aligned. Every motion appears quiet, patient, almost thoughtful. From where you stand below, it looks as though the bird has vanished. In reality, it has simply stepped into a part of its day that was never meant to be obvious. Perhaps that is why these moments feel strangely mysterious. Nature rarely hides behind distance. More often, it hides behind attention. We look at the open sky while the most remarkable things are happening only a few yards away, tucked inside branches we never think to examine. There is something quietly humbling about that realization. The birds were never performing for us. They were simply continuing a routine that has existed for countless generations, whether anyone was watching or not. But the deeper you follow this hidden rhythm, the more one question begins to linger. If this careful retreat happens after nearly every bath, then perhaps the water itself was never the true destination. Perhaps it was only the doorway into a world that begins where our eyes usually stop looking. Researchers who have spent years quietly observing wild birds have noticed something that fits this hidden pattern remarkably well. A bird's feathers are far more than a covering. Every feather is part of an intricate system that must stay perfectly aligned for flight, insulation, and even silent movement through the air. Water alone is never enough. After bathing, birds retreat because the real work is only beginning. They patiently draw each feather through the edges of their beaks, restoring thousands of tiny interlocking barbs that separate during flight and daily activity. Near the base of the tail, many birds also collect a thin layer of natural oil from a small gland, spreading it carefully across their feathers one section at a time. It is a routine so gentle that it almost looks like quiet meditation. None of it is hurried, none of it is random. If you interrupt this process, the bird often abandons the branch and searches for another hidden place where it can continue undisturbed. Suddenly, those disappearances feel different. They are no longer empty spaces in the morning. They are protected moments. There is something deeply familiar about that. People also seek quiet places before important moments. We close a door before gathering our thoughts. We step away from noise before making difficult decisions. Perhaps it should not surprise us that birds, in their own way, do something remarkably similar. Whether that feeling is simply empathy or something more reflective, it changes how the next moment unfolds. Because once you understand that the trees above you are filled with these unseen rituals, another question begins to emerge almost on its own. If birds are so careful about where they finish this invisible routine, how do they always seem to choose exactly the right place without ever appearing to hesitate? After enough mornings, you begin to notice something that feels less like chance and more like familiarity. The same maple branch catches the first sunlight. The same weathered fence post sits quiet for only a few seconds before a small shape lands upon it. A chickadee pauses there almost every day. A cardinal chooses the lower limb of the old oak. They are not simply finding any place to disappear. They are returning to places that seem to belong to them as surely as your favorite chair belongs to you. If you stand still long enough, the distance between your world and theirs feels just a little smaller. You begin recognizing individual habits instead of anonymous birds. One lingers in the warmth before smoothing the feathers beneath its wing. Another closes its eyes for the briefest moment as a gentle breeze passes through the leaves. Tiny droplets still cling to its feathers, sparkling whenever the sun shifts between the branches. It is an ordinary sight, yet it carries an unexpected sense of peace. Perhaps that is why these quiet routines stay with us. They remind us that life is built from small rituals repeated with care. Morning after morning, the birds return to familiar places not because the world never changes, but because those places continue to offer safety. There is something deeply comforting in that thought. We all search for branches that let us breathe a little easier. We all return to corners of the world that ask nothing from us except our presence. And as you continue watching, another realization begins to settle in almost without words. The birds have never been hiding from you. They have simply been trusting the landscape in ways that most of us have forgotten how to trust our own. That quiet truth makes the morning feel different, and what happens next becomes even more remarkable once you begin seeing the trees not as scenery, but as countless hidden rooms where another unseen life is unfolding. And this is where the story quietly becomes much larger than a single backyard. The branch above your garden is only one small piece of a hidden network stretching across forests, neighborhoods, parks, and open fields. Every morning, countless birds complete this same unseen journey. They descend to water, disappear into cover, and emerge again only when the invisible work is finished. Most people never connect those moments because they happen beyond the edge of ordinary attention. Yet if you pause long enough, a pattern begins to reveal itself. The trees are never as empty as they appear. Sunlight slips through the canopy in narrow beams, touching leaves that seem perfectly still. Somewhere inside that green silence, tiny movements continue. A feather catches the light for only an instant before blending back into the shadows. A branch bends almost imperceptibly under the weight of a bird you cannot quite see. Then everything becomes still again. It feels less like absence and more like a world choosing not to announce itself. There is something profoundly calming about that realization. Nature does not hide because it is secretive. It hides because it has never needed an audience. We simply pass beneath it, occupied by clocks, conversations, and destinations, while an entirely different rhythm unfolds overhead with quiet precision. Perhaps that is why these moments leave such a lasting impression. They remind us that wonder rarely arrives with noise. It waits patiently inside ordinary places until someone finally notices. But the deeper observers have looked into this hidden rhythm, the more remarkable another detail has become. These sheltered places are not chosen by accident. Birds return to them with astonishing consistency, as though each species carries an invisible map that guides them back to the exact branches where the next chapter of their morning quietly begins. If you continue watching long enough, another feeling begins to emerge, one that is more difficult to explain than the behavior itself. Many people believe that moments like these remind us of something we have quietly forgotten. Not because the birds are delivering messages or revealing hidden powers, but because they move through the world with a kind of attention we rarely allow ourselves anymore. They know when to seek water. They know when to disappear into shelter. They know when to wait for the warmth of the sun before returning to the open sky. Everything happens with an unhurried confidence that asks for nothing and proves nothing. There is something about that which feels difficult to ignore. Perhaps the mystery is not that the birds vanish. Perhaps the mystery is that they trust an invisible rhythm without questioning it. We spend so much of our lives searching for certainty that we often overlook the quiet wisdom of simply following what the moment requires. As the morning grows brighter, the branches slowly come alive again. A familiar silhouette appears where only leaves existed a few minutes earlier. Another settles nearby. They emerge so naturally that you almost wonder if they had been there all along, waiting for your eyes to become patient enough to notice them. Whether you see that as nothing more than instinct or as something quietly symbolic is a personal decision. Both can exist side by side without diminishing the other. Science explains how these routines help birds thrive. Reflection invites us to consider why watching them feels strangely comforting. Perhaps those two truths have never been in conflict. And once that thought settles in, the ordinary landscape outside your window begins to feel unexpectedly deeper, as though every tree is holding countless quiet stories that reveal themselves only to those willing to pause before looking away. I have found that after watching long enough, the urge to solve the mystery slowly fades. It is replaced by something quieter. You stop searching for the exact branch hidden inside the canopy. You stop wondering which leaf concealed the tiny movements you could not quite see. Instead, you simply notice how different the morning feels once you realize it was never empty. The breeze sounds softer than before. The spaces between birdsong seem less like silence and more like pauses in a conversation that has been unfolding long before you stepped outside. Sunlight moves gently across the bark of an old tree, and somewhere beyond the reach of your eyes, another bird patiently finishes the same careful ritual it completed yesterday and the day before that. There is comfort in knowing that some things continue whether we witness them or not. Perhaps that is why these moments stay with us. They remind us that not everything meaningful demands our attention. Some of the most beautiful parts of the natural world remain beautifully ordinary because they were never meant to impress us. They simply exist, quietly and faithfully, day after day. When you begin seeing the landscape this way, even familiar places become richer. The trees outside your window are no longer just trees. They become places of shelter, of patience, of routines carried out with remarkable care. The birds no longer seem to appear and disappear without reason. They seem to move through chapters of a life that briefly overlaps with yours before continuing beyond your view. And somehow, that thought feels less like losing sight of them, and more like being gently reminded that every ordinary morning contains far more life than we usually allow ourselves to notice. Eventually, another morning will come. The light will spill across the same branches. A familiar breeze will ripple through the leaves, and somewhere nearby, a bird will step into a shallow pool of water before lifting quietly into the trees. For just a moment, you may find yourself resisting the old habit of assuming it has simply flown away. Instead, you might look toward the canopy with a different kind of curiosity. Not because you expect to witness something extraordinary, but because you now understand that the extraordinary often lives inside moments we once considered too ordinary to notice. Perhaps that is the quiet gift these birds leave behind. They remind us that the world is always larger than the part we happen to see. Every disappearance is not an ending. Sometimes it is simply a continuation taking place beyond the reach of our attention. Whether you see that as nothing more than the quiet precision of nature or something that gently echoes through your own life is entirely your choice. Many people find comfort in believing that the natural world still carries lessons we have not completely forgotten. Others simply appreciate the remarkable beauty of behaviors shaped by countless generations. Somehow, both perspectives seem able to exist together. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If stories like this help you slow down and notice the hidden rhythms of the world around you, I hope you will subscribe before you leave, because there are still countless ordinary moments waiting to reveal extraordinary truths. Until next time, take one more look out your window before you hurry back to your day. Somewhere out there, perhaps only a few branches above where your eyes usually rest, another quiet chapter is unfolding without asking to be seen. Maybe it is only a bird, but after everything we have shared together, it never quite feels like only a bird.